The warp screamed. Above Helios Prime, reality twisted into impossible geometries as the howling tear rent the fabric of space-time. Colors that had no names in any human tongue bled across the polluted sky, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. The rift pulsed like a wound in the universe itself, vomiting forth energies that made the planet's atmospheric processors shriek in mechanical agony. From the hive spires below, billions of souls cowered as warning klaxons wailed their litany of terror. The orc, Wag, had been battering Helios Prime's outer defenses for 3 solar days, their crude ships darkening the sky like a plague of metal locusts. Governor Thalus had sent 17 Vox transmissions to the nearest Astra Militarum garrison, each more desperate than the last. Help was coming, they said. The Emperor protects, they said. The Emperor was nowhere to be found when the greenskins broke through. But something else emerged from the howling tear. A figure in red and blue descended through the rift's bleeding light cape, billowing behind him like the wings of some primordial angel. He moved with impossible grace through the toxic atmosphere, unencumbered by breathing apparatus or void suit. The harsh radiation that would have cooked an unprotected human in seconds seemed to pass through him like morning mist. Homelander surveyed the battlefield below with eyes that burned like miniature stars. Orc war machines sprawled across the industrial district like metallic tumors, their crude weapons spitting death into the fleeing masses. He could see everything, every terrified face pressed against hab-block windows, every guardsman's ammunition count, every greenskin's violent intent radiating like heat from their brutish forms. The clarity was intoxicating. A battle wagon's cannon swiveled upward, its gunner having spotted the floating figure. The massive shell screamed through the air, trailing fire and exhaust. Homelander didn't move. The projectile struck him center mass and detonated in a bloom of orange flame and shrapnel. When the smoke cleared, he remained perfectly still. Not even his cape singed. "Interesting," he murmured, voice carrying despite the howling winds, "but inadequate." His eyes began to glow. Twin beams of crimson energy lanced downward, carving through the battle wagon's armor like a hot knife through parchment. The vehicle's ammunition stores detonated in a chain reaction that sent a pillar of fire reaching toward the toxic clouds. Orc bodies flew like burning ragdolls, their war cries cut short by the sudden kiss of oblivion. Homelander descended, boots touching down on the scorched ferrocrete with gentle precision. Around him, the remaining greenskins rallied their scattered forces, their primitive minds struggling to process this new threat. They had come to Helios Prime expecting weak humans and their pathetic Imperial Guard. Not this. A mob of orc boys charged him with typical greenskin enthusiasm, chain blades roaring and sluggus blazing. Homelander smiled, not the practiced media smile he had worn for cameras in another life, but something genuine and terrible. He moved. The first orc's head simply vanished, vaporized by a casual swing of Homelander's hand. The second found itself lifted by the throat feet, kicking uselessly as superhuman fingers crushed its windpipe like wet cardboard. The third managed a single confused grunt before heat vision turned its torso into steaming ruin. In less than 30 seconds, 40 orcs lay dead. Homelander stood among the carnage, breathing easily, not a drop of alien blood on his costume. The remaining greenskins, those few possessed of enough wit to recognize certain death, fled toward their extraction points, abandoning weapons and vehicles in their haste to escape this impossible foe. From the hive blocks, a sound began to build. Tentative at first, then growing in volume and fervor. The sound of worship. Miracle, miracle. The Emperor sends his champion. We are saved, we are saved. Homelander turned toward the nearest hab block where hundreds of faces pressed against reinforced windows. Their expressions held the raw desperation of the saved, the stunned gratitude of those who had looked into the abyss and found salvation instead of death. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across his perfect features, a memory unwelcome and sharp. Another crowd, another ski, another time when he had tried to save them. The airplane had been falling, its engines dead, passengers screaming in the cabin. He had caught it, held it aloft with all his strength, trying to guide it to safety. But the metal had buckled under the stress, the fuselage cracking like an eggshell in his grip. He had saved perhaps a dozen. The rest fell into the ocean in a shower of twisted metal and burning fuel. And when he had returned to the surface, when he had stood before the cameras to explain what had happened, the faces in the crowd had not held gratitude. They had held accusation, blame, hatred. Why didn't you save them all? You could have done more, monster freak, we never wanted you. The words had cut deeper than any weapon, deeper than Butcher's schemes or Vought's manipulations. The truth that had always lurked beneath the surface, they feared him. They had always feared him. Their love was nothing but elaborate pretense performed out of terror. The memory dissolved like smoke, leaving only the present. Only the faces pressed against glass, tears streaming down their cheeks as they beheld their savior. But these were not the faces of his past. These people had not yet learned to fear him. They saw only the miracle of salvation, the answer to their prayers made manifest in red and blue. A smile spread across Homelander's lips. Not the terrible expression he had worn in battle, but something closer to wonder. Here, perhaps, he could be something different, something more than the failed hero of a failed world. Citizens of Helios Prime, his voice boomed across the district, enhanced by vocal cords that could shatter steel. Your ordeal is ended. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of voices rose in unison, crying out praise and benediction. Some fell to their knees in the rubble-strewn streets. Others pressed their faces against windows so hard the reinforced glass began to crack. From the ecclesiarchal cathedral came the deep toll of ceremonial bells, their bronze voices proclaiming a miracle to the ash-stained sky. Canoness Lear would later claim she had sensed the divine presence the moment it manifested. The truth was simpler. She had heard the explosions and seen the pillar of fire and recognized opportunity when it fell from heaven. Within an hour, the first Voxcasters were broadcasting across Helios Prime. The message was simple, repeated in High Gothic and 17 local dialects. A living saint has come among us. The Emperor's champion walks in our midst. Rejoice, for we are blessed above all worlds. Homelander stood atop the highest spire of the industrial complex Cape, whipping in the radioactive wind. Below him, the city spread like a cancer of metal and concrete, its inhabitants scurrying through their designated paths like ants in a carefully designed maze. But these ants were looking up. These ants were praying. And in their prayers he heard something he had never truly possessed in his previous life: genuine veneration. Not the manufactured worship of corporate marketing or the fearful compliance of those who had no choice. This was raw, unfiltered awe. The thought crystallized in his mind like ice forming on metal. In his old world, he had wasted decades chasing the impossible dream of being loved. Love was fickle. Love was conditional. Love could be withdrawn the moment he failed to meet their perfect expectations. But worship was eternal. Worship was absolute. Worship was what gods received. The Voxcasters crackled to life across the hive city, carrying his voice to every soul within 1,000 kilometers. People of Helios Prime, hear me. I am not merely an instrument of the Emperor. I am not some distant saint content to perform miracles from afar and vanish into legend. His voice carried perfect certainty, the absolute confidence of one who had looked into the abyss of his own nature and embraced what he found there. I am your Emperor, your new Emperor, the Emperor that humanity deserves in this dark age, the one who will not sit silent on a golden throne while his children suffer and die. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kneel, my people, kneel and be saved. And across Helios Prime they knelt, some from genuine devotion, overwhelmed by the miraculous salvation they had witnessed. Others from confusion, uncertain how to process this unprecedented proclamation. Still others from simple terror, recognizing the voice of absolute authority when it spoke. But they all knelt. From the cathedral spire, Canoness Lear watched through her magnoculars as her world transformed around her. Her vox bead crackled with frantic transmissions from her subordinates, each one demanding guidance she did not possess. The ecclesiarchy had protocols for miracles, carefully structured procedures for investigating and validating signs of divine intervention. There were no protocols for this. In the depths of the hive, Magos Dominus Fam 9 studied energy readings that made no sense according to any known science. The being's power source was undetectable by conventional augurs, yet its capabilities exceeded anything in the Mechanicus archives. His mechadendrites writhed with anticipation as he began compiling preliminary hypotheses. Perhaps this was a remnant of the dark age of technology, some perfect fusion of human will and technological transcendence. High above in the orbital monitoring station, Inquisitor Varys received the first garbled reports with growing alarm. The descriptions were fragmentary, contradictory, but certain details emerged with troubling consistency. Unprecedented power, unverified claims of divinity, mass civilian compliance. His augmetic fingers began composing a priority transmission to his superiors, even as he ordered his ship to break orbit and investigate personally. Whatever had manifested on Helios Prime, it represented either the greatest miracle in 10 millennia or the most dangerous heresy the Imperium had ever faced. On the surface, oblivious to the storms of confusion and controversy already beginning to swirl around him, Homelander spread his arms wide and smiled. The setting sun painted the sky the color of blood and gold, a fitting backdrop for the birth of something new, something that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of power worship and the price of both. The age of the failed hero was ending. The age of the God Emperor had begun. The morning after salvation brought new hymns to Helios Prime. In the Schola Progenium dormitories, 10,000 children between the ages of 6 and 16 gathered for their daily catechism. But today the lessons had changed. Where once they had recited the emperor's virtues and memorized passages from the Lectitio Divinitatus, now they spoke different words. "Repeat after me," intoned Sister Superior Agatha, her voice carrying across the vast assembly hall. The emperor of old sat silent while his children suffered, but the emperor reborn walks among us. The Emperor reborn walks among us. 10,000 young voices echoed in perfect unison. Homelander watched from the observation gallery above, invisible to the children below, but drinking in every syllable of their devotion. Each word was a drop of pure adoration flowing into the vast reservoir of worship he was building within himself. These children had never known doubt about his divinity. They had been born into a world where he was already God. "And what is the first virtue of the faithful?" Sister Agatha continued. "Obedience to the Emperor reborn," came the response, crisp and immediate. "And the second virtue, purity of flesh and spirit as exemplified by the Emperor reborn. And the third virtue, devotion unto death for the Emperor reborn's glory." The children's faces glowed with innocent fervor as they recited their new catechism. Homelander smiled, remembering how long it had taken to convince Sister Agatha to implement the revised curriculum. A simple demonstration had sufficed, a casual display of heat vision that had turned a bronze statue of the old emperor into molten slag. The good sister had seen reason immediately afterward. 3 weeks had passed since his advent, and the transformation of Helios Prime proceeded ahead of schedule. The planet's governing council had been receptive to his suggestions for social improvement. Those few members who had expressed reservations about the radical changes were no longer in positions to voice such concerns, or in positions to voice anything at all. The purification programs had begun with medical assessments in the lower hive levels. Citizens were evaluated for genetic fitness, psychological stability, and devotional purity. Those who failed the assessment simply disappeared during the night shift, their HAB units reassigned to more suitable occupants by morning. The official explanation was relocation to agricultural colonies on the system's outer worlds. The ash falling from the industrial district's new crematoriums suggested a different truth. "Lord Protector," came a voice behind him. Homelander turned to see Canoness Lear approaching, her power armor gleaming with fresh benedictions inscribed in golden script. The sororitas had adapted to the new order with remarkable alacrity, though he could still sense the fear radiating from her like heat from a forge. Good. Fear was honest. Fear was pure. "Canoness," he acknowledged, not bothering to correct the title. The people had given him many names in these past weeks: Lord Protector, the Emperor reborn, the Savior of Helios Prime. He found he enjoyed the variety. "The morning devotions have been completed across all 17 hive districts," she reported. Attendance was mandatory as ordered, with only 43 absences recorded system-wide. "And those absences have been addressed, my lord. Their families have been relocated to facilitate their spiritual correction." "Excellent. Homelander's gaze returned to the children below. Tell me, Canoness, do you believe they love me? The question caught her off guard. He could hear her heartbeat accelerate, see the micro-expressions of confusion and carefully suppressed horror that flickered across her augmetic features. My lord, they are devoted, absolutely devoted. That wasn't what I asked. His voice carried no threat, merely curiosity. Do they love me the way a child loves a parent, the way a soul loves its creator? Canoness. Lear was silent for a long moment, struggling with an answer that would not damn her either way. Finally, she spoke with careful precision. They worship you, my lord. They obey you. They would die for you without question. But do they love me? I do not know, my lord. Homelander nodded, pleased with her honesty. Neither do I, Canoness. And that is why love is irrelevant. Love can be withdrawn. Love can be perverted. Love can become hatred with a single moment of disappointment. He gestured toward the children below, who were now filing out of the assembly hall in perfect formation. But this is eternal. This is absolute. They do not worship me because they choose to. They worship me because they cannot conceive of doing otherwise. I am not their beloved leader, Canoness. I am their God. And gods do not need to be loved. They need only to be obeyed. In the depths of Forge Tertius Magos Dominus Fam 9 studied readings that continued to defy rational analysis. His servo skull circled the chamber where the being, the Lord Protector as he was now called, had submitted to comprehensive biological scanning. The results filled 17 data slates and raised more questions than they answered. The subject's cellular structure was recognizably human, but optimized beyond any known gene template. Muscle fiber density exceeded Astarte's baseline by a factor of 12. Bone composition suggested materials that existed only in theoretical models. Neural activity patterns indicated processing capabilities that approached cogitator-level efficiency while maintaining organic flexibility. Most intriguing of all, the being showed no signs of warp mutation or chaos taint, despite his apparent emergence from an unstable warp rift. If anything, his bio-reading suggested an inherent resistance to psychic influence that exceeded even the Sisters of Silence. Fascinating, the Magos muttered through his Vox Grill mechadendrites writhing with agitation. The perfect fusion of human genetic potential and unknown technological enhancement. This could be the key to reversing 10 millennia of human decline. The implications were staggering. If the Lord Protector's genetic template could be analyzed, replicated, perhaps even improved upon, the Imperium could field armies of such beings. The Great Crusade could resume with warriors who made even the Primarchs seem like crude prototypes. But first he needed more data, much more data. The Vox chime interrupted his calculations. Magos Fam 9 to the primary laboratory, Priority Alpha. He arrived to find the Lord Protector waiting beside one of the gene sequencing cogitators, his cape perfectly arranged despite the chamber's industrial winds. The being's expression was pleasant, almost friendly, but something in his posture suggested coiled violence. Magos, Homelander said warmly, I trust your research proceeds well. Indeed, Lord Protector, the preliminary results are unprecedented. Your genetic template represents a quantum leap in human evolution. With your permission, I would like to begin replication studies. Replication. The being's smile widened. How fascinating. Tell me, Magos, in your studies of my biology, have you identified any weaknesses? The question was asked with casual curiosity, but Fam 9's threat assessment protocol suddenly blazed crimson warnings across his consciousness. Every survival instinct he possessed, both organic and mechanical, screamed danger. No, Lord Protector. Your physiology appears to be without flaw, perfect in every measurable aspect. Good. Homelander stepped closer, and the Magos caught a glimpse of heat building behind those perfect blue eyes. Because I would hate to think that the Omnissiah's servants were looking for ways to harm their new emperor. Never, my lord. The Mechanicus exists to serve humanity's betterment. Your arrival represents the culmination of our sacred mission, the perfection of human form through divine will and technological transcendence. Exactly. The heat faded from Homelander's gaze, replaced by something that might have been approval. Continue your research, Magos. But remember, I'm not a subject to be studied. I am the end goal, the perfect template from which all future humanity will be derived. When you look upon me, you look upon the future of our species. After the Lord Protector departed, Magos Fam 9 stood motionless for nearly 6 minutes, processing the encounter. His rational mind cataloged the being's words as simple megalomania, the delusions of a powerful individual drunk on worship and authority. But his data archives whispered different possibilities. What if it wasn't delusion? What if this perfect being truly did represent humanity's destined evolution? What if the emperor of old had been merely the prototype and this new arrival was the finished product? The questions would haunt his calculations for weeks to come. In the arbitrator precinct house, former Judge Arbitrator Vex reviewed the daily enforcement reports with growing unease. Crime on Helios Prime had virtually disappeared, not through effective policing, but through the simple expedient of eliminating criminals. Theft was now punishable by immediate execution. Assault warranted public flogging, followed by exile to the ash wastes. Sedition or blasphemy against the Lord Protector meant vaporization carried out personally by their new god emperor with theatrical precision. The population had adapted with remarkable speed. Citizens reported their neighbors for infractions real and imagined. Children informed on their parents for expressing doubt about the new order. Even private conversations were conducted in whispers, lest the Lord Protector's enhanced hearing detect insufficient enthusiasm. "Judge Arbitrator Vex," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see one of her subordinates, Enforcer Matthias, approaching with obvious reluctance. "What is it, Enforcer?" "We've received reports of unusual activity in Sector Sigma 7, mass gatherings, unauthorized assemblies. The citizens appear to be conducting some form of ritual worship." Vex frowned. Unauthorized religious gatherings were technically violations of imperial law, requiring ecclesiarchal sanction before being permitted. But given the current circumstances, shutting down worship of the Lord Protector seemed inadvisable at best. "What sort of ritual?" "They've erected a statue, Judge Arbitrator, 20 meters tall, carved from hive stone. It depicts the Lord Protector in divine aspect, and they're making offerings." "What kind of offerings?" Matthias's face went pale. "People, Judge Arbitrator. They're sacrificing people they deem unworthy of the Lord Protector's grace, cripples the elderly, anyone who fails to show proper enthusiasm during the daily devotions." The reports continued for another hour, each one painting a picture of a society transforming with terrifying speed. The old imperial order hadn't been destroyed, it had been perverted, twisted into something that served the will of a single individual with absolute efficiency. And the most disturbing part was how willingly the population had embraced these changes. These weren't the actions of a conquered people being forced into submission. This was voluntary transformation, driven by genuine belief that their new god emperor offered them something better than the Imperium's distant protection. As the binary suns of Helios Prime set behind the hive spires painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Homelander stood once again atop his chosen perch. The city spread below him had been remade in his image, efficient, devoted, and absolutely subservient to his will. Voxcasters throughout the hive districts carried his evening address to every citizen. "My beloved people, 3 weeks ago you lived in fear. Fear of Xenos invasion, fear of neglect by distant authorities who viewed you as expendable, fear that your prayers went unheard in the vast darkness of space." His voice resonated with perfect authority, each word calculated for maximum emotional impact. "That age has ended. You are no longer forgotten children of a dying empire. You are the chosen people of a new age. Through your devotion, through your purity, through your absolute faith in my divine will, you have become something greater than mere humanity." The response was immediate. Millions of voices raised in unified praise, a sound that could be heard from orbit. "Tomorrow we begin the next phase of our great work. The neighboring systems will learn of the miracle that has transformed Helios Prime. They will see what humanity can become under proper guidance, and they will beg to join us in paradise. Some may resist, Some may cling to the old ways, the failed ideologies of a rotting Imperium, but they will learn as you have learned. They will kneel as you have knelt. They will worship as you worship. For I am not merely your emperor. I am your destiny made manifest. I am humanity's future walking among you in perfect flesh, and through me, through absolute devotion to my will, you shall inherit the galaxy itself. The transmission ended, but the cheering continued for another 20 minutes. High above in the orbital monitoring station that had become his personal stronghold, Inquisitor Varys compiled his latest report with trembling fingers. What he had witnessed over the past 3 weeks defied every protocol in the Ordo Hereticus handbook. The being calling itself the Lord Protector had demonstrated power beyond mortal comprehension, but wielded it in service of goals that seemed to mirror the Emperor's own original vision. The purification programs, while brutal, had eliminated genetic deviants and chaos cultists with surgical precision. The social reorganization had created unprecedented stability and productivity. The devotional practices, while unorthodox, showed no signs of chaos taint or Xenos influence. By every measurable standard, Helios Prime was thriving under its new leadership. Crime had vanished. Productivity had increased by 300%. Military recruitment was approaching universal participation. The population showed levels of loyalty and motivation that exceeded even the most successful imperial worlds. And yet Varys knew in his bones that he was witnessing the birth of something monstrous. The reports would reach Terra eventually, along with requests for guidance from the highest authorities. Until then, he could only watch and document as an entire world transformed itself into something that was technically still part of the Imperium, but served a very different master. His final entry for the day was brief but prophetic. Subject continues consolidation of authority. Population compliance approaches 100%. Recommend immediate intervention before contagion spreads to neighboring systems. Time may be running short. The astropathic scream reached Terra 17 days after Inquisitor Varys transmitted his final report. In the obsidian halls of the Imperial Palace, where the dying emperor maintained his eternal vigil upon the Golden Throne, the message was decoded by trembling psychers whose minds barely survived contact with its contents. The words themselves were simple enough, rendered in standard Imperial Gothic cipher. But the psychic resonance that accompanied them carried undertones of worship so intense, so absolute, that 3 astropaths suffered complete mental collapse simply from processing the transmission. Lord Inquisitor Torvin Crix read the decoded message in the silence of his private sanctum, surrounded by relics that had witnessed 10 millennia of the Imperium's struggle against heresy. Each word struck him like a physical blow. Helios Prime under control of unknown entity claiming imperial divinity, population compliance total, standard protocols insufficient. Request immediate exterminatus authorization or deployment of full chapter strength. Situation deteriorating rapidly. Entity demonstrates capabilities exceeding documented Primarch baseline. This is not a drill. This is not a test. The Imperium faces an existential threat. The message bore Varys's personal seal along with authentication codes that confirmed its authenticity beyond any doubt. Torvin had known Varys for 2 centuries. The man was methodical, cautious to a fault, and utterly incapable of hyperbole. If he requested exterminatus authorization, the situation was beyond desperate. But Helios Prime was not some forgotten backwater that could be quietly erased from imperial records. It was a major industrial world home to 40 billion souls and factories that supplied weapons to 6 different segmentums. The political ramifications of its destruction would echo across the galaxy. More troubling still were the secondary reports filtering in from neighboring systems. Pilgrims were already departing for Helios Prime in unprecedented numbers, drawn by rumors of miracles and divine manifestations. Trade ships carried stories that grew more elaborate with each retelling. The Emperor reborn was healing the sick, they said. He was perfecting humanity. He was ushering in a new golden age. Within 72 hours of the astropathic transmission reaching Terra, the Imperium's response was decided. Not exterminatus, the industrial losses would be catastrophic. Instead, a more surgical approach, investigation, evaluation, and if necessary, elimination. The orders went out through channels so secret that even their existence was classified beyond the highest security levels. Chapter Master Arden Thorn received his deployment orders while his Black Templars were concluding a purge operation in the Mordian system. The transmission was brief, encrypted with ciphers known only to the Emperor's most trusted servants, Helios Prime. Possible Primarch level threat. Investigate. Terminate if confirmed heretical. Maximum discretion authorized. Thorn read the message 3 times before allowing himself to believe its contents. Primarch level threat. The phrase appeared nowhere in standard Imperial doctrine because such threats were not supposed to exist. The Primarchs were unique, irreplaceable, the pinnacle of the Emperor's genetic artistry. For something to be classified at their level meant either a miraculous return or a catastrophic emergence. Brother Captain Mordecai, he voxed to his second-in-command, prepare the fleet for immediate warp translation. We depart for the Helios system within the hour. The Helios system, Chapter Master, but our current orders specify, our current orders have been superseded by the highest authority. We have new prey to hunt. On Helios Prime itself, the transformation continued with relentless efficiency. The planet's industrial output had increased by 400% since Homelander's arrival, driven by a workforce that labored with religious fervor. Citizens competed for the honor of working extra shifts, of contributing more to their God Emperor's vision. Sleep was seen as selfishness. Rest was interpreted as insufficient devotion. The results were spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. Weapons that had taken months to manufacture now rolled off production lines in days. Starships that should have required years of construction were completed in weeks. But the human cost was staggering. Workers collapsed at their stations from exhaustion, only to be carried away by their colleagues, who immediately took their places. The industrial districts ran red with the blood of those who had pushed themselves beyond all biological limits in service to their new deity. Homelander observed these developments from his palace. The former governor's residence expanded and transformed into something that resembled a fusion of cathedral and fortress. The building's architecture had been reshaped by his heat vision, its walls carved with reliefs depicting his various miracles and pronouncements. At its heart lay the throne of truth, a massive construction of gold and human bone where he held court each day. Lord Protector, Canoness Lear announced as she entered the throne room, her voice carrying the trained reverence that had become mandatory for all who approached him. We have received word that several off-world delegations request permission to visit Helios Prime. Representatives from the Adeptus Ministorum, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and she paused, her augmetic implants clicking with anxiety, the Ordo Hereticus. Homelander's expression didn't change, but Lear caught the subtle shift in his posture that indicated heightened attention. After 6 weeks of serving as his primary liaison with the ecclesiarchy, she had learned to read these micro-expressions. Her survival depended on it. The Inquisition wishes to visit us. His voice carried amusement rather than concern. How traditional of them. I suppose they want to verify that their new emperor meets their standards for divinity. My lord, perhaps it would be wise to what Canoness Hyde pretend that what we have built here is somehow subject to their approval. He rose from the throne, and Lear fought the urge to step backward. Even after weeks of exposure, his presence remained overwhelming. No, send word that all delegations are welcome. Let them come and see what the Imperium can become under proper leadership. And if they attempt to interfere with your divine work... Homelander's smile was radiant and terrible. Then they will learn why the old emperor failed where I have succeeded. They will learn what happens when mortals challenge the will of a god. 3 days later, the first Inquisition vessel translated into the Helios system. The ship bore no identifying marks, its hull painted in the matte black favored by those who preferred to remain unnoticed. But Homelander's enhanced vision picked out its approach vector from geosynchronous orbit, and he watched with interest as it established a standard orbital pattern. Inquisitor Varys stood on the bridge of his ship studying the tactical displays with growing amazement. Helios Prime's orbital defenses had been completely rebuilt in the 6 weeks since his last report. Where once there had been a handful of aging defense platforms, now a network of sophisticated weapon stations formed an impenetrable shell around the planet. More troubling still, the energy signatures suggested technology that exceeded standard Imperial specifications by several orders of magnitude. My lord, his aide whispered, studying the sensor readings with obvious confusion. These defensive installations, they're using power sources we don't recognize. The output levels are off the charts." Indeed. Varys activated the long-range augers focusing on the planet's surface. What he saw there defied rational explanation. The industrial districts were operating at impossible levels of efficiency. Massive construction projects that should have taken decades appeared to be nearing completion. And everywhere, massive statues and monuments depicted the being he had come to investigate. "Shall we request permission to make planetfall, Inquisitor?" Varys was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Standard protocol demanded a thorough investigation before taking any action. But every instinct he possessed screamed that delay would only make the situation worse. "Open a channel to the planetary authorities," he decided. "Request immediate audience with their Lord Protector." The response came within minutes, transmitted on all frequencies with enough power to be heard throughout the system. "Inquisitor Varys, I have been expecting you." The voice was perfectly modulated, carrying just enough warmth to seem welcoming while maintaining an undertone of absolute authority. It was the voice of someone who had never doubted their right to command, never questioned their own supremacy. "Permission granted to make planetfall. Coordinates are being transmitted to your navigation systems. Come and see what the Imperium can become when it serves the right master." The transmission ended, leaving Varys staring at displays that showed landing coordinates for the planet's primary spaceport. There was no threat in the message, no overt hostility, but something in that voice had triggered every survival instinct he possessed. "My lord," his aide prompted. "Prepare my personal shuttle," Varys ordered. "Full honor guard combat loadout. And transmit our position to the Black Templars' fleet. If we don't report in within 12 hours, they are to consider this mission compromised." 2 hours later, Varys stood in the central plaza of Helios Prime's primary hive city, surrounded by a crowd whose fervor bordered on madness. Hundreds of thousands of citizens had gathered to witness the Inquisitor's arrival, their faces glowing with the kind of religious ecstasy usually reserved for the most sacred imperial ceremonies. But this wasn't worship of the Emperor. This was something else entirely. Homelander descended from the sky like a falling star, his cape trailing behind him, as he landed with perfect grace in the plaza's center. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of voices raised in unified acclamation, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hive city. "Inquisitor Varys," Homelander said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd's adoration. "Welcome to the future of humanity." Varys studied the being before him with the trained eye of one who had spent centuries identifying threats to the Imperium. What he saw challenged every assumption he had formed about the nature of power and divinity. The being appeared human, perfectly human in fact. But there was something in his posture and the way he moved that suggested capabilities far beyond mortal limitation. More disturbing still was the crowd's reaction. These weren't the fearful subjects of a tyrant or the devoted followers of a charismatic leader. This was worship in its purest form, the kind of adoration that the Emperor himself had only rarely inspired. "Lord Protector," Varys replied, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "I come seeking answers. The reports from this world have been unusual." "Unusual?" Homelander's laugh was genuinely amused. "Inquisitor, what you see here isn't unusual. It's inevitable. This is what happens when humanity is given proper leadership. When they're shown what they can become, rather than merely told what they must endure." He gestured toward the crowd whose voices had settled into a rhythmic chant of his name and titles. "Look at them, Varys. Look at their faces. When did you last see such joy in Imperial citizens? When did you last witness such perfect unity of purpose? The old Imperium rules through fear and deprivation. I rule through inspiration and perfection." "And the disappearances?" Varys asked bluntly. "The citizens who have vanished since your arrival. What inspiration guided their removal?" The crowd's chanting faltered for a moment, and Varys felt the weight of a million stares. But Homelander's expression remained pleasant, almost paternal. "Ah, the Inquisitor comes armed with accusations rather than questions. How refreshingly direct." He stepped closer and Varys fought the urge to reach for his weapon. "Tell me, Inquisitor, in your centuries of service, how many disappearances have you authorized? How many worlds have you purged in the name of the Emperor's peace? How many billions have died to preserve the purity of a system that leaves them hungry, afraid, and abandoned? Varys said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. The citizens who have been relocated, Homelander continued, were sick, genetically compromised, mentally unstable, spiritually corrupt. I gave them the mercy of a clean death rather than a lifetime of suffering. The old Imperium would have let them linger, breeding more weakness, spreading more decay. I eliminated the disease at its source. That is not your decision to make, Varys said quietly. The Imperium has protocols. The Imperium is dying. The words cut through the air with the force of absolute conviction. Its protocols, its traditions, its entire structure is a monument to stagnation and decline. I offer something better. Something perfect. Something that can actually protect humanity rather than merely preserving its corpse. The philosophical debate might have continued, but it was interrupted by a new sound, the distinctive roar of Space Marine drop pods breaking atmosphere. High above, Chapter Master Thorne's fleet had arrived in the system, and the Black Templars were making their own assessment of the situation. Homelander looked up with mild interest as streaks of fire crossed the sky. Ah, the Emperor's angels come to visit. How delightful. This should be educational for all involved. Around them, the crowd began to murmur with uncertainty. Space Marine deployments meant war, and war meant death. But their God Emperor seemed unconcerned, even pleased by this development. Shall we greet our new guests together, Inquisitor? Homelander asked, rising slowly into the air. I'm curious to see how my predecessor's genetically enhanced warriors compare to the perfection I represent. As the first drop pods struck the plaza's outer edges and Black Templars in full battle gear emerged with weapons ready, Varys realized that he was about to witness either a miracle or a massacre. Either way, the outcome would reshape the galaxy's understanding of power divinity and the price of challenging a god who had decided that the old order was no longer sufficient for his ambitions. The drop pods struck the plaza like meteors of black adamantium, their retro thrusters scorching the ferrocrete as they discharged their cargo of the Emperor's finest warriors. Steam hissed from cooling metal as the assault ramps slammed down, revealing the armored giants within. Chapter Master Ardon Thorne emerged from the lead pod, his black and white power armor gleaming with sacred oils and battle honors earned across 3 centuries of righteous warfare. Behind him came 24 of his finest battle brothers, their bolters held ready but not yet aimed. This was an investigation, not an assault. Yet. The crowd of worshippers pressed backward, creating a widening circle around the Space Marines. These were children of Helios Prime, raised on stories of the Emperor's angels, but the reality of their presence was overwhelming. Each Astarte stood head and shoulders above the tallest humans, their very existence, a reminder of humanity's capacity for transcendence through the Emperor's will. Homelander remained motionless in the air above the plaza, studying the new arrivals with obvious interest. His enhanced vision cataloged every detail of their equipment, every modification to their genetic template, every tactical position they assumed as they fanned out to secure the landing zone. Magnificent, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the plaza despite the distance. The pinnacle of the old Emperor's ambition. Warriors bred for perfection, enhanced beyond mortal limitation, absolutely devoted to their cause. He descended slowly, boots touching the ferrocrete with gentle precision. But tell me, Chapter Master, what happens when a flawed creator's perfect warriors encounter actual perfection? Thorne's autosenses analyzed the being before him, cross-referencing everything his armor's machine spirit could detect against the Astartes archives. Height, approximately 8 feet. Mass, estimated 400 pounds, though his movement suggested density beyond that measurement. Threat assessment, immeasurable. I am Chapter Master Ardon Thorne of the Black Templars, he announced, his vox-amplified voice echoing from the surrounding hab blocks. I come in the name of the God Emperor of mankind to investigate reports of heretical activity on this world. Heretical activity? Homelander's laugh was genuinely delighted. Chapter Master, you stand in the presence of divinity itself and you speak of heresy. Look around you. Look at these people. When did you last see such perfect devotion in imperial citizens? When did you last witness such absolute faith? The crowd had indeed reformed around them, pressing closer despite the intimidating presence of the Space Marines. Their faces glowed with fervor as they gazed upon their God Emperor, and many had begun a low chant that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. Emperor reborn, Emperor reborn, Emperor reborn. You hear them? Homelander continued gesturing toward the worshippers. This is what genuine faith sounds like, not the fearful compliance your Imperium extracts through threats and violence, but true devotion freely given to one worthy of it. Inquisitor Varys stepped forward, his bolt pistol remaining holstered but his hand resting on its grip. Chapter Master, this being claims to be the Emperor reborn. He has established a cult of personality that has consumed an entire world. The population shows signs of complete psychological conditioning. Homelander's expression shifted, the pleasant mask slipping for just a moment to reveal something colder beneath. Inquisitor, these people worship me because I am worthy of worship, because I have given them something the old Imperium never could, a leader who is actually superior to them rather than merely claiming to be. He began to pace in a slow circle around the Space Marines, who turned to track his movement without breaking formation. Their discipline was perfect, their readiness absolute. But something in their posture suggested they were beginning to recognize the magnitude of what they faced. You see, Chapter Master, the fundamental flaw in your Imperium's philosophy is the pretense of equality, the fiction that all human life has equal value, that leadership is merely a burden shared among the worthy rather than the natural right of the superior. His eyes began to glow with building energy. I'm not pretending to be divine for political convenience. I'm not maintaining authority through institutional inertia. I am God because I possess the power of God, because I am perfect where others are flawed, because I am eternal where others decay. There is only one Emperor, Thorn replied, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of unshakable faith. He sits upon the golden throne guiding humanity through the darkness. All others who claim divinity are heretics, xenos, or demons. The Emperor is dying, Homelander said quietly. The words fell like stones into water, creating ripples of shock through the assembled crowd. Has been dying for 10,000 years, a corpse sustained by the daily sacrifice of innocent souls, too weak to speak, too broken to act, too proud to relinquish power to those more capable of wielding it. The effect on the Space Marines was immediate and visceral. Several battle brothers raised their bolters, targeting systems, locking onto the blasphemer's center mass. Chapter Master Thorn's hand moved to his chainsword, though he had not yet drawn the blessed weapon. You will not speak such lies in our presence, Thorn growled. Lies. Homelander stopped pacing, turning to face the Chapter Master directly. Brother, I speak only truth, the uncomfortable necessary truth that your Imperium has spent millennia trying to deny. Your Emperor failed. His great crusade collapsed. His perfect sons turned against him. His dream of human unity became a nightmare of stagnation and decay. The glow behind his eyes intensified, and several of the Space Marines' armor systems registered dangerous energy buildup. But I will not fail. Because I am not burdened by sentiment, by false idealism, by the delusion that humanity can be saved through mercy and forgiveness. I rule through strength and strength alone. I am what your Emperor should have been, what he would have been if he had possessed the will to embrace his true nature. Enough. Thorn drew his chainsword in one fluid motion, its blessed teeth roaring to life. You stand accused of heresy against the God Emperor of mankind. Submit to imperial justice or face the consequences of your blasphemy. Around them, the crowd began to murmur with growing agitation. These were their protectors, the Space Marines they had been taught to revere, and the God Emperor they had learned to worship. But the two forces seemed to be in opposition, and the cognitive dissonance was creating visible distress among the civilians. Homelander noticed their confusion and smiled with what might have been genuine compassion. My people, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the plaza, do not fear. What you witness here is not conflict, but revelation. These warriors represent the old order, the failed system that abandoned you to alien invasion, that left you to suffer, while distant bureaucrats debated the value of your lives. He rose into the air again, positioning himself above both the Space Marines and the crowd. His cape billowed in the toxic wind, and the setting sun painted him in shades of gold and crimson that seemed almost supernatural. Today, you will see the birth of a new age. Today, you will witness the moment when humanity's future finally defeats its past. Today, your God proves his worthiness through deed rather than word. The first shot came from Brother Sergeant Cassius, whose targeting system had locked onto what it calculated as the optimal strike point. The bolt shell screamed through the air, its mass reactive tip designed to penetrate even the heaviest armor before detonating with enough force to shatter reinforced bone. Homelander caught it between his thumb and forefinger. The bolt shell hung in the air for a moment, its momentum completely arrested by his casual grip. Then he squeezed and it crumpled like paper, its explosive payload contained and neutralized by flesh that seemed more durable than adamantium. "Impressive," he said, examining the crushed projectile with academic interest, "but insufficient." The full squad opened fire. 24 bolt weapons discharged in perfect synchronization, filling the air with a storm of explosive shells that would have reduced a battle tank to scrap metal. The sound was overwhelming, a continuous thunder that shook windows throughout the surrounding hab blocks. Homelander stood motionless in the center of the maelstrom, letting the shells impact his body and detonate harmlessly against his skin. Smoke and fire wreathed him like a second cape, but when the barrage ended, he remained unmarked and unperturbed. "Is that all?" he asked. Chapter Master Thorne's response was immediate and decisive. His jump pack ignited, propelling him through the air toward his target with chainsword raised. Centuries of combat experience guided his strike, a precise blow aimed at the junction of neck and shoulder, calculated to sever critical arteries and nervous pathways. The chainsword's blessed teeth struck Homelander's flesh and shattered. The weapon's machine spirit died with a mechanical scream as its sacred components failed against skin that proved harder than the finest ceramite. Thorne himself was caught in midair, Homelander's hand closing around his throat with casual strength. 300 years of service, Homelander mused, studying the struggling Space Marine with apparent fascination. Thousands of battles fought millions of enemies, slain all in service to an ideal that was already dying when you were born. His grip tightened, and even the chapter master's enhanced physiology began to show signs of distress. "Tell me, warrior, in all your centuries of faith, did you ever question whether your God was worthy of such devotion?" Thorne's response came not in words, but in action. His power fist activated with a whine of building energy, slamming into Homelander's torso with enough force to pulverize a boulder. The impact was tremendous, visible as a shockwave that rippled through the air and cracked the ferrocrete beneath their feet. Homelander didn't even sway. "Admirable," he said, genuine approval in his voice. "You choose action over philosophy, death over doubt. I can respect that, even if I cannot condone the waste of such magnificent potential." His eyes blazed crimson, and twin beams of energy struck Thorne's center mass. The chapter master's power armor, blessed by 100 tech priests inscribed with prayers accumulated over 3 centuries, enhanced with the finest materials the Imperium could provide, began to melt. But Thorne was not merely a space marine. He was a chapter master, a living legend, a warrior who had faced down greater demons and emerged victorious. As his armor failed around him, he activated his final weapon, a melt-a-bomb that would vaporize everything within 50 meters. "For the Emperor!" he roared, his voice carrying absolute conviction, even as his body began to burn. The explosion was magnificent, a sphere of destruction that turned the plaza's center into a crater of molten glass. When the smoke cleared, the surviving Space Marines stared in horrified amazement at the figure that emerged unharmed from the devastation. Homelander stood in the crater's center. His costume unmarked his expression, one of mild disappointment. In his hands, he held the twisted remains of Thorne's helmet, its ceramite structure warped by heat but still recognizable. "Such waste," he said sadly. "Such pointless, tragic waste." Around the plaza, the crowd had fallen to their knees in unison. What they had witnessed transcended miracle. This was proof of divinity itself. Their god Emperor had faced the Emperor's finest warriors and emerged not merely victorious, but untouched. The surviving Space Marines faced a choice that their training had never prepared them for. Their chapter master was dead killed by a being whose power exceeded anything in their combat doctrines. Their weapons were useless, their tactics meaningless against an enemy who could ignore their strongest attacks. But they were Space Marines. They knew no retreat. Brother Sergeant Cassius stepped forward, drawing his power sword with mechanical precision. "Brothers," he voxed on a closed channel, "for Thorn, for the Emperor, charge!" What followed was not a battle but a demonstration. Homelander moved through the attacking Space Marines like death itself, his casual gestures ending lives that had endured centuries of warfare. He was careful to make each death meaningful, each defeat a lesson to the watching crowd about the futility of challenging divine will. When the last Astartes fell, Homelander stood alone in the plaza's center, surrounded by the broken remains of the Imperium's finest. His breathing was steady, his expression calm, his costume unstained by the blood of his enemies. "Behold," he said, his voice carrying to every soul in the Hive City. "The old order lies broken at my feet. The Emperor's angels have fallen before the power of the Emperor reborn. Let none say that divine right is merely a pretty phrase or that power alone makes gods." The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of voices rose in acclamation, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. This was worship in its purest form, not the carefully orchestrated devotion of imperial ceremony, but the raw adoration of souls who had witnessed genuine divinity. Inquisitor Varys watched from the plaza's edge, his mind racing through protocols and contingencies that suddenly seemed laughably inadequate. He had expected resistance, perhaps even violence, but this was beyond resistance. This was revelation of his entire worldview's bankruptcy. His Vox bead crackled with incoming transmissions from the Black Templars' fleet in orbit. Panicked voices demanded situation reports, requested orders, begged for guidance that he was no longer qualified to provide. "Inquisitor," Homelander said, his voice somehow reaching Varys despite the crowd's continued celebration. "You have questions." It was not a request. Varys found himself walking forward, his legs moving without conscious command, until he stood before the being who had just demonstrated power beyond imperial comprehension. "What are you?" he whispered. "I am what your emperor should have been," Homelander replied. "What he could have been if he had possessed the will to embrace perfection rather than clinging to sentiment. I am humanity's future Varys, the template from which all future generations will be derived." And what of the Imperium? What of Terra? What of the billion worlds that serve the Golden Throne? Homelander's smile was radiant and terrible. They will learn as Helios Prime has learned. They will kneel as these people kneel. They will worship as they worship, not through conquest. Inquisitor conquest implies struggle between equals. This will be conversion willing and joyful and absolute. He gestured toward the cheering crowd whose voices had resolved into a new chant. "Emperor reborn, God of gods, master of humanity, Emperor reborn." Listen to them, Varys. When did you last hear such perfect faith? When did the old Emperor's name inspire such genuine joy? I offer humanity what it has always craved, not a distant father figure who demands sacrifice while offering only silence, but a living God who walks among his people and proves his worth through deed. The Inquisitor's hand moved toward his bolt pistol, then stopped. What was the point? He had just witnessed 24 Space Marines fall like children before this being's power. His weapon would be no more effective than their bolters had been. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Your service," Homelander replied simply. "Your acknowledgement that the old order has failed and that something better has taken its place. Your help in bringing this miracle to the rest of humanity. And if I refuse, then you will die, and someone more enlightened will take your place. The choice is yours, Inquisitor, but the outcome is inevitable. I am the future, humanity's future. The only question is whether you will be part of it or an obstacle to it." Varys looked around the plaza, taking in the scene of worship and devotion that surrounded them. Every face he could see glowed with genuine happiness, with a kind of spiritual fulfillment that he had rarely witnessed in his centuries of service. These people weren't afraid, they were grateful. They weren't oppressed, they were liberated. And perhaps most disturbing of all, they were right. His bolt pistol hit the ground with a metallic clang that seemed to echo throughout the plaza. "What would you have me do?" he asked. Homelander's smile widened and he placed a gentle hand on the Inquisitor's shoulder. "Help me bring truth to the galaxy, my friend. Help me show humanity what they can become when they follow a God who is actually worthy of their faith." The Vox transmission that reached Terra 3 days later carried no encryption, no security protocols, no attempt at concealment. It broadcast on every frequency, penetrated every defense, and spoke with the authority of absolute power to every soul within 1,000 light years. Citizens of the Imperium. Homelander's voice resonated across the galaxy, his image appearing on Vox screens throughout human space. "I speak to you from Helios Prime, where the future of our species has been born. I am your Emperor, reborn, your perfected leader, your divine guide through the darkness that has consumed our galaxy for too long." On Terra, in the shadowed halls where the High Lords of Terra conducted the Imperium's business, panic spread like contagion. Lord Commander Guilliman himself was summoned from the Indomitus Crusade, his face grim as he studied reports that defied rational belief. An entire chapter of Space Marines destroyed, an Inquisitor converted. A world transformed into something that challenged the very foundations of Imperial authority. The age of distant rule is ending. Homelander continued his perfect features, radiating confidence and benevolence. No longer will humanity suffer under the guidance of a corpse god who demands sacrifice while offering only silence. No longer will you bow to authorities who view you as expendable. I am among you. I walk with you. I am everything your old emperor should have been and everything he failed to become. The response from Helios Prime was immediate and overwhelming. The Vox transmission showed millions of citizens gathered in the planetary capital's great plaza, their voices raised in unified adoration. These weren't the fearful masses of a conquered world. These were believers, converts, true faithful, who had found something worthy of their devotion. Emperor reborn, God King, master of humanity. But it was not merely the population's response that sent shockwaves through Imperial command structures across the galaxy. It was the presence of Imperial officials standing beside their new God Emperor, lending their authority to his proclamation. Canoness Lear spoke first, her augmetic voice carrying clearly across the transmission. "The Adepta Sororitas of Helios Prime pledge eternal service to the Emperor reborn. We have witnessed miracles beyond counting power, beyond measure, and wisdom beyond the capacity of mortal minds to fully comprehend." Magos Dominus. Fam 9 stepped forward next, his mechanical form somehow managing to convey reverence despite its inhuman modifications. The Omnisia speaks through perfected flesh. The God Emperor's true will is made manifest in the Emperor reborn. The Adeptus Mechanicus of Helios Prime recognizes the divine template and pledges our sacred knowledge to its service. Finally, most shocking of all, Inquisitor Varus himself appeared before the Voxcasters. His face bore the hollow expression of a man whose fundamental beliefs had been shattered and rebuilt, but his voice carried unshakable conviction. "I have served the Imperium for 3 centuries, hunting heretics and protecting the faithful from corruption. I tell you now with complete certainty that what I have witnessed on Helios Prime is not heresy, it is revelation. The Emperor reborn walks among us. Humanity's future has a face, a voice, and the power to make his promises reality." On distant worlds, Imperial governors watched the transmission with growing unease. Some immediately began preparing their own declarations of loyalty to the traditional Imperium. Others quietly instructed their astropaths to open communication channels with Helios Prime. A few, the wisest or most pragmatic among them, began composing messages that could be interpreted as support for either authority depending on which side ultimately proved victorious. But the transmission was not yet complete. Homelander himself returned to address the galaxy directly, his voice carrying the perfect authority of one who had never doubted his right to command. "I do not come as a conqueror. I do not seek to destroy what you have built, but to perfect it. The Imperium's structure will remain its worlds, its institutions, its sacred traditions, but it will serve a living God rather than a dying one. It will be guided by perfection rather than decay. It will offer its citizens hope rather than mere endurance. To those who doubt, I offer proof. Witness the transformation of Helios Prime, where crime has vanished, where productivity exceeds all imperial records, where every citizen serves not from fear, but from genuine devotion to something greater than themselves. To those who resist, I offer patience. I understand that change is difficult, that faith in old ways dies hard, but change is inevitable. I am inevitable. Humanity's destiny will not be denied by those too weak to embrace it. And to those who choose wisdom, I offer partnership. Join me in building the golden age that the Emperor of old promised but could never deliver. Help me guide humanity to its true potential. Stand beside your God and inherit the galaxy itself. The transmission ended, but its effects rippled across human space like a shockwave. On 100 worlds, citizens gathered in public squares to debate what they had witnessed. In the depths of hive cities, workers whispered of miracles and transformation. In the halls of noble houses, lords and ladies weighed the implications of backing the wrong side in what might become the greatest schism in imperial history. On Terra itself, the response was swift and decisive. Within hours, the Senatorium Imperialis had convened an emergency session. The debate that followed would have seemed impossible just days before the highest authorities in the Imperium were seriously discussing whether a being who claimed to be the Emperor Reborn might actually possess legitimate divine authority. The evidence is undeniable, argued Lord Admiral Spire, his weathered face grave with the weight of the decision before them. An entire chapter of Space Marines destroyed by a single individual, power that exceeds anything in our records, and most importantly, the willing conversion of imperial officials who have served with distinction for centuries. Evidence of what? Countered Master of the Administratum Violetta Rain. Power alone does not grant divine authority. The Primarchs possessed tremendous power, but they were still flawed, still capable of corruption and failure. This being may be powerful, but that does not make him the Emperor. Then explain the popular response. Lord Commander of the Astra Militarum Corin Vatic interjected. We have reports of spontaneous demonstrations on 17 worlds, citizens demanding their governors pledge allegiance to this Emperor Reborn. The Guard is reliable, but if the population turns against us... The debate continued for hours, but the underlying reality was inescapable. The Imperium faced a crisis unlike any in its 10,000-year history. They could declare the being on Helios Prime a heretic and mobilize the full might of the Imperial war machine against him. But if he proved as powerful as reports suggested, the cost would be catastrophic. And if the population believed in his divinity, military victory might prove meaningless. The decision when it came was unprecedented in Imperial history. Lord Commander Guilliman himself delivered the pronouncement, his face bearing the weight of ages as he spoke the words that would reshape the galaxy. By decree of the Senatorium Imperialis, acting in the name of the God Emperor of mankind, the being known as the Emperor Reborn, is hereby recognized as a living saint of the Imperium, granted authority to govern Helios Prime and its satellite systems according to his divine wisdom. The carefully crafted language was a masterpiece of political necessity. The traditional emperor remained the ultimate authority, but the practical power of the Emperor Reborn was acknowledged and legitimized. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but offered everyone a path to survival. On Helios Prime, Homelander received the news with a smile of perfect satisfaction. He stood in the throne room of his palace, newly expanded and modified to accommodate the representatives who now flocked to his court. The architecture had been transformed by his heat vision into something that resembled a fusion of imperial grandeur and personal magnificence. Massive columns inscribed with his image and words, vaulted ceilings that displayed his miracles in golden relief, and at the center of it all, 2 thrones. The larger, more magnificent throne was his own, carved from a single piece of rare stone, elevated above all other seats designed to emphasize his absolute supremacy. But beside it, only slightly smaller and positioned with careful respect, sat a second throne. This one bore the traditional imperial aquila and was reserved for official ceremonies when the formalities of imperial hierarchy needed to be observed. "The dual throne," he murmured to Canoness Lear, who stood at his right hand. A perfect solution to an imperfect situation. They acknowledge my authority while maintaining the fiction of their own. I gain legitimacy while they retain the illusion of control. Will this arrangement satisfy you permanently, my lord? She asked. Homelander's laugh was soft and genuinely amused. Permanently, my dear Canoness, this is merely the beginning. Today, they recognize my authority over one world. Tomorrow, it will be one system. Eventually, it will be the galaxy itself. But patience is the virtue of gods. I can afford to wait while lesser beings adjust to new realities. The first delegation from Terra arrived within a week, led by a cardinal of the Adeptus Ministorum, whose name carried weight throughout the Imperium. Cardinal Vex was ancient, even by imperial standards, his augmetic life support systems, the only thing keeping his centuries-old body functional. But his mind remained sharp, and his political instincts were legendary. He knelt before the dual throne with the precise degree of reverence that acknowledged Homelander's authority without technically diminishing the traditional emperor's supremacy. It was a performance that demonstrated the new reality the Imperium would bend, but it would not break. Your Holiness, Cardinal Vex intoned, using the title that had been specially created for this unprecedented situation. I bring greetings from Terra and the blessing of the Senatorium Imperialis. The Imperium rejoices in the manifestation of divine will and pledges cooperation in all righteous endeavors. Homelander received the formal submission with gracious dignity, playing his part in the political theater with perfect precision. But those who knew him well, the inner circle of converts who had witnessed his transformation from savior to God Emperor, could see the satisfaction in his eyes. This was what he had always wanted, what he had always deserved. Not the desperate love of the fearful, but the willing submission of those who recognized his superiority. Cardinal, he replied, his voice carrying the warmth of paternal approval. The Imperium's wisdom in recognizing divine truth brings joy to my heart. Together, we shall guide humanity to heights undreamed of by previous generations. The ceremonies that followed lasted for 3 days and were broadcast throughout human space. Citizens across the galaxy watched as their new Saint Emperor was formally invested with authority over his domain, blessed by representatives of every major imperial institution, and praised as the harbinger of a new golden age. But perhaps the most significant moment came at the very end, when Homelander stood alone before the Voxcasters for a final address to his new subjects. My beloved children. He began the words carrying paternal affection that seemed utterly genuine. Today marks the beginning of our great work together. You have chosen wisdom over fear, hope over despair, progress over stagnation. You have chosen to follow a God who walks among you rather than one who remains silent in distant halls. I make you this promise under my guidance. Humanity will reach its true potential. The weak will be made strong. The impure will be perfected. The divided will be united under one voice. One perfect leader who will never abandon you as others have done. You need not love me, though many of you do. You need not understand me, though. Wisdom comes to those who try. You need only obey me, serve me, trust in my divine wisdom to guide you through the darkness that surrounds our galaxy. For I am your Emperor reborn. I am your perfected leader. I am your God-made flesh walking among you, proving my worth through deed rather than demanding faith through fear. Kneel and inherit the future. Obey and become more than human. Serve and help me build paradise among the stars. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across Helios Prime, across the growing number of worlds that acknowledged his authority across the galaxy itself, millions of voices rose in unified acclamation. Emperor reborn. God King, master of humanity. Emperor reborn. And in his palace, seated upon his magnificent throne with the empty imperial throne beside him, serving as a reminder of authority not yet claimed. Homelander smiled. He had achieved something unprecedented in human history. He had become God through choice rather than conquest, through demonstration rather than declaration, through the willing submission of those who recognized his superiority. The old emperor had failed because he demanded worship while remaining distant. The chaos gods had failed because they offered only corruption and madness. But he had succeeded because he offered something neither could match: perfection made manifest, divinity proved through deed, a God who walked among his people and demonstrated his worthiness every day. Months passed, and the transformation continued. World after world petitioned to join the growing realm of the Emperor Reborn. The Imperium's official position remained that he was a living saint, serving the true Emperor's will. But the practical reality was unmistakable. A new power had emerged in the galaxy, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. And through it all, Homelander maintained the perfect balance between divine authority and political necessity. He was the God his people needed him to be, the leader they chose to follow, the perfect fusion of power and purpose that offered humanity something it had never possessed before: a deity who actually deserved their worship. The age of the Corpse Emperor was ending. The age of the God King had begun. And in the darkness between the stars, watching the birth of this new order with interest and approval, entities of unimaginable power took notice of what had been accomplished. Not conquest through force, not conversion through fear, but transformation through willing choice, the most insidious and effective form of change possible. Homelander had not just become a god, he had become the god that humanity deserved: perfect, powerful, and absolutely committed to giving them exactly what they asked for. Whether they would survive getting their heart's desire remained to be seen. From the personal journal of Inquisitor Varys, formerly of the Ordo Hereticus, now serving as first apostle to His Holiness, the Emperor Reborn, it has been 1 year since the manifestation of divine will on Helios Prime. The transformation of our world continues to exceed all expectations. Crime remains virtually non-existent. Productivity maintains levels that would have been impossible under the old system. The population displays contentment and purpose that I have never witnessed in 3 centuries of imperial service. Yet I find myself unable to sleep some nights, staring at the ceiling of my new quarters in the Palace of Truth, wondering what we have truly accomplished here. We have created something unprecedented. A theocracy that actually works, a divine ruler who actually possesses divine power, a system of government based on genuine rather than manufactured worship. His Holiness rules with perfect justice, absolute wisdom, and unwavering dedication to humanity's betterment. He asks for nothing but service offers, everything but mercy for those who oppose him, and demonstrates daily why he deserves the devotion he receives. So why do I sometimes wake with tears on my face, mourning something I cannot name? Perhaps it is simply the old man in me clinging to familiar failures rather than embracing unfamiliar perfection. Perhaps it is the trained suspicion of an inquisitor who spent too many years hunting monsters to fully trust even legitimate miracles. Or perhaps it is the recognition that we have achieved something terrible in its perfection. We have given humanity exactly what it always claimed to want. A God who is present rather than absent. A leader who is perfect rather than flawed. A system that works rather than merely endures. And in getting everything we asked for, we may have lost something essential that we never realized we possessed until it was gone. But these are the doubts of an old man whose purpose has been fulfilled. Tomorrow I will pledge my service to His Holiness and continue the great work of perfecting humanity under divine guidance. After all, doubt is a luxury that only the faithful can afford. End journal entry.